Today, I'm really excited to have Rishabh Jain on the podcast. Rishabh is the founder of Mewt, a new fintech app that simplifies business banking by unifying accounts offered by state and private banks in one platform. Mewt has raised from the likes of Kona Capital, BG Davai, and BNext. Prior to Mewt, Rishabh had worked as an associate product manager at American Express and as a product manager at Sprinkler. I was really excited to have Rishabh on the podcast today because I think there's a lot of really interesting technology startups being founded in Asia and particularly for me in India. And it was really great to get some more insight into some of the work that Mewt is doing to really empower small businesses. I think in general, Asian tech companies and specifically Indian tech companies are going to be a force to reckon with. And so it's really exciting to see some of the innovations done in the space. With that said, I really enjoyed talking with Rishabh, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hello, Rishabh, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh yeah, wonderful. Nice to meet you, Daivik, finally.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's get into it. What got you into entrepreneurship, and what led you to Mewt?
I think I was there was always the plan. I think it's a part of the overall upbringing and the way I've been into the system. So uh, prior to that, I was yeah, I'm based out of a very tier 3 city near Ajmer, Rajasthan. Was not aware of so things like before joining bits it was always like I didn't even know the whole like how the education works, and can you even go to international schools for education. Like that was a new thing for me. So
Right.
I was like, you know c- you can say I was hyper desi. I didn't know too many
Right.
things, but then
Uh-huh.
but then the plan was always to not get into like just like plain as corporate, but
Mhm.
to get into the understanding of system, to learn a little bit deeper. So yeah, that's happened. I spent 4 years there. Met very good people. Many of the people are running their own companies or doing all of that. So that was like basic thing there. And then yeah, met Kushal as well, and that's only from first year itself. So we used to hang around and doing late night conversations on various companies, and we always used to regret that we should have started this, done this, blah blah blah. We could have raised this. Yeah.
Right.
So like classic steps of you can say first time entrepreneurs. Those happen, but I never started up. It was always that the integral fear that do I know enough? Can I even do this things and all those?
Right.
Yeah, cut to Amex, joined Amex as the as a research engineer initially, but then got transformed into a product manager. Was the youngest and only product manager in Amex India for
Right.
like 2 years. Spent 2 years there. Got my chance overall to move to the US as well finally, and do all those things, but then could not move because of the COVID and the whole thing. So yeah, I felt like doing something interesting and different. So joined Sprinkler, very interesting company. They connect very large companies to very to their end customers, people like Nike, Adidas. You name
Mhm.
anybody, and Fortune 1500. At that time, we had somewhere about like 1350 as clients. Just crazy, right? Like
Right.
whoever you can think of, like those companies are there. So yeah, I spent a good amount of time, met really interesting people there in terms of so work with um, the top 10 companies in the world, couple of them
Mhm.
actually, and then understood like the way they structure their customer needs and how they are like you would be able to call the differences between somebody like an Amex, because I work there, versus somebody who is not particularly focused on those local banks and all those things. Yep,
Right.
that's how the overall story went by. And then I felt like starting up, yeah, wanted to do the impact. I have this side of me which is more towards altruism, more towards understanding the needs of people and all those. So felt like I should be making the most amount of impact, and obviously that boils down to solving the world hunger problem.
Right.
But you cannot just do that. So I started going to we have this things called Mandi. This is like like farmers market in the US. It's like
Yeah.
equivalent of that
Yeah.
a little. Yeah. So I started going there every 5 o'clock in the morning. Went there for close to a month and a half. Started, and then this is like peak COVID time. So that
Right.
was the only place where you don't have any restrictions whatsoever. It's impossible to control farmers. So
Yeah.
so when there, understood too many things about the system, and then felt like we can solve the the eventual problem of world hunger, but I would need at least $2 trillion kind of money to do it. And
Yeah.
on a global scale, by the way, like $2 trillion is not that much amount of money. Like if you think about it,
Right.
like if you want to solve world hunger, like detach, or like I have this concept of make it like become insensitive to a problem like that. Like
Right.
so that problem basically can be solved with $2 trillion. It's not that much amount of money, but nobody is going to give me that money. So
Yeah.
let's so, and then there's no point in just doing this for. I mean, I'm not a classic believer of just do it for maybe 100 people and then thousand and maybe
Right.
die off with the dream, and then maybe your third generation is working that. That does not make sense to me, to be honest.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like things that I can do, things that I already know of, and what I'm attached to was, again, looking back, already understand a little bit of fintech, understand how things work in the US. So and then very small things, like for example, um, there's a interesting process of checks, like the habit of writing checks to people and then they can
Right.
present it in the bank. So in India, you have to go to the bank physically and present the check, right?
Right.
And when I learned about that, this is not the case in the US, wherein you can just take a snap and then send it to the bank. And I was like, what? Like, this is
Yeah.
completely inefficient, right? Like it takes like one does not make sense. And then it just goes a little more deeper into the way debit first society versus a credit first society in the ground level itself. So let's say you have an EMI, or basically a monthly installment due, wherein you are supposed to pay by 31st of every month. Let's say clear off your dues or something, and you have
Right.
the cash, but the bank is, let's say, closed right now. You would not be able to clear that off. So not only you are getting a penalty on top, for not clearing things on time, wherein you had the money in hand, like literally, but also your credit score is also getting impacted because you
Right.
did not pay your loan on time.
Right.
Doesn't make sense. Doesn't Not a problem of 2022. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that basically triggered me, and most of the SME problems. So SMEs are like small to medium sized businesses.
Right.
Classic example would be somebody who is running a store of his own, and then there will be one or two people maximum calling the shots, and then maybe two three employees, four employees, and that's the overall setup. Classic
Right.
businesses in the country. And you will see that most of these people, I'm aware of these because both of my parents are SMEs. Like my dad has
Right.
a different kind of factory, my mother has a different kind of factory. So spending time on dinner table conversations and understanding things were like very natural to me. So for example, things like going to the bank, my dad actually considers going to the bank as work.
Right.
Uh, doesn't make sense. I mean, and I'm
It
able to
should be
say this
convenient.
because yeah, I mean, like, and he's like, yeah, you're like, you cannot run your business if you're not going to the bank. So it's like, blocking like 2 hours in your calendar, you're physically going there,
Yeah.
driving for like 15-20 kilometers. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
That's, I mean, couple of all these things piling up. We started like doing something in this space. It's good enough. It's 100 million SMEs in the country, structured, unstructured, and multiply that by four plus 100 million are the people who are getting employed by them. So that's like half a billion people whom you can basically impact by changing the landscape of finances itself.
Yeah.
Because yeah, everything can be like in developing nations specifically, and most of the things can be tied back to just money. So
Hmm.
so if I'm able to get into this kind of system of bringing all of this together, this is where I think we would be able to drive the maximum impact. And yeah, it started with SMEs. We took cut to yeah, we raised around with BNX and some of the other angels as well. But
Right.
then 6 months later, January this year, we launched. Uh, we're not expecting good response, but we got like extremely like very very good response, which is just bonkers. And
Yeah.
yeah, we were able to just rise up numbers, stake up all those things, raise another round from Kona this time, raise like $4.5 million in total, like $5.2 million is what we raised.
Right.
And then meanwhile we like ended up understanding a little more deeper into the system itself. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, that's like the overall story and the things how they have went by so far. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very crazy journey. You've had so many different experiences. It's cool to hear how you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit from the beginning, and so it seems like you've always wanted to work on a startup. but you started off with the corporate route, and then you decided to jump back into startups. So I guess reeling it back from the beginning, when you decide to jump from the corporate route to startups, even with the entrepreneurial spirit, what do you think the biggest challenge was switching from being in a corporation to doing your own startup?
Very interesting. I've talked about this on LinkedIn as well, but I'll talk about the different side of story that I cannot share there, or I did not share there so far. But two, three things. So, from personal point of view and from a corporate point of view, there were like two, three aspects. One, uh, personal point of view, there's always a question that what's going to happen next, and this is
Right.
where you become somehow other, like everybody who's around you, like your co-founder, your first employee, whoever you're working with initially, angels, and everybody basically expect you to be mature enough to take these brave decisions.
Right.
Not necessarily they happen in the same format, right? Like it's yeah, it's not rational. So it started with my, so when I basically started to put down the papers and a sprinkler, and I had this conversation with my parents. Everyone was like, why does he want to do that? Like, has he gone mad? It's what's
Yeah.
happening there. My extended family were like, yeah, he does not understand things. And I told them that, like, like I've been able to raise money as well. So, I'm sorted a little. I'm not taking salary for the per se, but I'm
Yeah.
just sorted for a little while. I have my savings and I would be able to get things going and all those things. But yeah, it just becomes, so, for example, I've been like I heard from my other extended family members that you can do this thing from the side. You don't have to get fully involved. It's like a hobby project. And I'm like, no, it's an actual
Yeah.
thing. It's, yeah, it exists. Yeah. And then yeah, there are like too many different level of things that, like kicking away that kind of job. You're kind of becoming like, new support for the family.
Yeah.
Your dad is like planning to get early retirement kind of shit in his head, and
Yeah.
suddenly he's just had to come back to working again because he thinks that it's going to be very difficult. It's not, but just a mental barrier kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think like definitely in Indian families that's very predominant. Where I think we like security a lot, so taking
Yeah,
a risk like
100%.
that
Yeah.
isn't necessarily we don't do that a lot as much. So
But no, yeah, 100%. My I had this conversation with my dad so many times that you have, so he does not have that much of liquid money for that matter, but
right.
he has good amount of assets. I know them, right? And I'm like, why would you, like, what would you do with this, right? I mean, I don't want your money. You can just sell them off. You can like have a very, very like extremely extravagant retirement, and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
enjoy your life. And then it's not a thing that it just like very hard to live for them. So
yeah,
I went through all those personal phases to the point of me like talking to like we have this concept of like arranged marriage in India.
yeah,
So
yeah,
people get like talking to other people, and they're like, what would we talk about that our son do not make any money? I'm like, yeah, you should say that. Like, he does not make any money whatsoever. So all those happened. It's
yeah.
been interesting on those grounds. Yeah. On a professional
Going,
level, it was more. Yeah. Sorry.
I was saying going for chai samosa during during those conversations must be very interesting when you go for chai samosa at somebody's
Also,
house.
I didn't explain them. I was like, I'm not interested, to be honest. Like, it's
Yeah,
almost impossible for you to and make people understand. So, for example, I had this like common thing that we have shared across many people, that and even even people like who are educated, like many of the people are not aware that this money is what an investor is giving you is an investment in the company, right? And they are getting shares for that. They
yeah,
are- they basically think like it's a loan that you have gotten and you have to return the money
right.
back. And there's a difference, because the point you think that a company that is not generating any revenue has to return the money back and does not make sense.
Right,
So I mean that those things basically happened, and I was like, yeah, this is something that we can fix, and we should talk about it, and all those things happened. But anyway,
right,
long
right,
story short, that was the essence of things.
right.
And yeah, I mean, personal grounds, things happen, things went by. My parents started to just settle with things. My
Yeah,
extended family was still in the motion of not accepting anything whatsoever.
right.
But yeah, it's fine, it just happened. But then the interesting thing happened from a very professional point of view, that it was a mental barrier, that what am I going to lose. And
Right.
you think that, yeah, I have this passion, but then when you don't have mentors in the right place, or when you don't particularly consider that mentor relationship to be in place
Hmm.
personally, then there's always this mental barrier, that what am I going to lose. And you
Right.
end up thinking that maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. I have to go back to, I don't know, doing like less important things. And like, what would happen if the thing does not work? Like, would I be going back and doing the same thing? Would I like start from the bottom again? And what would happen
Right.
in that case? And then here's the thing, right? Again, it all like circles around the mentality of like a classic Indian mindset, that what would my parents think, and how would I handle that kind of conversation on the table. So anyway, so but all of that
Yeah.
happened. Like it was just a leap of faith. I had some conversation with some of the other founders, and what I heard was, whatever happens, and this is like a message that I pass on to like my juniors as well from bits. Uh, and my people who are there, who are just having a conversation with me. Common thing to do here is, and I like remember this very vividly. He said that the maximum that you are going to lose is essentially your mental bandwidth a little, and your health is going to deteriorate a little bit on the mental side of story. Your
Right.
mindset is going to increase. Your mindset is going to improve for sure. Your capacity to handle things at scale would increase for sure, and your level of stress management will become a breeze. What your other friends would be thinking right now. And I was like, fuck,
Right.
that's like I never thought about that, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then the interesting thing that it just went into deeper branches is that if you're going back to the corporate world, you have a different kind of mindset now. You don't have to start from the bottom again. You just you're already better than many of the other people. You're not managing like a team of 50 people today, but when you're running
Yeah.
a startup, you would be doing that by default. Like that's going to happen. Um, yeah, and then I mean those things matter. I mean just somebody else telling you the same things that you already know. I don't know. It
Right.
just
Yeah.
feels better. So I did that. I took the leap of faith. I resigned. We were able to raise the round very next week from my
Wow.
resignation. But that's very interesting. So that's awesome. We were able to close around
Right.
in like 4 days, and yeah, it's just crazy. But anyway,
That's
so
very impressive.
yeah, and it was very odd as well. I didn't know like how it's supposed to be done, so I did all the wrong things first.
Right.
Yeah, and, there's side of there's a part of entrepreneurship that people should basically just embrace and laugh about, which is we always has this thing that we should just do things again, like do the same mistakes again. Somebody else is telling you not to do things, and you're like, nah, yeah, I,
Right.
I, I don't know. I'll just do it. I'll experience it on my own, and I did that. We did all of those things. But
Right.
then now I'm like, I'm becoming a little more strong-headed. I'm not particularly more, very apologetic on some of the senses. Like I'm grounded, but I'm not, like the older me. It's a very interesting phase.
Right.
Plus, learning has been extremely crazy. Like I've learned so many things from that point that it just, I don't know. Yeah, it was overwhelming. So that those
Right.
initial period, if I think about it, I remember that when I put down the papers to like when I went into the race, I was very calm. But then the point race started. I could not sleep for 3 days straight. And the point we heard that we are closing in and we got the term sheet. Just I don't know.
Yeah.
It was we're not able to embrace it. Like we did not even celebrate to be honest. It was just it's just because so my co-founder Kushal was in Netherlands and I was in India and the COVID was there. So uh, yeah, just that. It just like nothing new happened.
Yeah.
Not celebrate much, but then it was just a little different. The
A
experience
sigh
was
of
very.
relief.
I, I mean, I don't know. It's not relief kind. It's like
Okay.
like once you so for example, like you get down from a roller coaster and then now you have to drive back. And,
Right.
and, and now consider that the time between these two activities is less than 10 minutes. And so you're still in that,
Right.
like
Right.
rush that this
Adrenaline
happened,
rush.
but then now I have to go back and I have to do the
Right.
same. I have to build the company now. So it's like shit just got real. So I mean, it was
Well,
just
Let's talk about it. So, so Mewt's a super banking app where all business accounts are under
Hmm.
one platform, specifically targeting SMEs. And it's also a
Hmm.
POS solution to allow businesses to make fast transfers and accept payments instantly. And I know you touched on
Hmm.
some of the motivation behind creating it. But I think what was really interesting is I read an article where you mentioned that Mewt is on the path to redefine merchant QR payments in India in the same way that Square in the US done with has done with point of sale terminals. So I was just wondering,
Yeah.
like, when you look at Square's journey, I know you mentioned like there's a lot of takeaways you took from the U.S. market and you started applying to India. What were some of the biggest takeaways you took from Square's journey, and you think that you can apply in
So
Mute?
no, 100%. So Square itself is a very so here's the thing, that like if you look from a very let me start from this point, right? The kind of decisions that you take, right? Or it, no, no, let me put it this way. I recently met a friend of mine,
Right.
and we discussed on many of the aspects, and he wanted to become a monk, and all those things happened. But
Okay.
then now he told me this one thing that his professor basically wrote on his CMU's door, that says
Okay.
that as an engineer you should not be innovating. That's it. Like you just reiterate on things and then make them a little better. You don't have to innovate all the time.
Right.
So and the interesting thing is that what it means is that you don't have to do too many things to create the new thing. I mean, as an engineer, this is the by default. I know for a fact that the first the super app that we created was it took us good amount of time. It took us like 3.5 months to get the product out, and yeah, we got lucky with the people signing up and all those things. But if that wouldn't have happened, then the mistakes that we did were we launched too late. We should have
Right.
launched the first iteration itself, and we didn't have to create like this hyper complex application on the first
Right.
go. It's and so I mean those things happen, and we wanted to fix all of those. So this is where we basically started looking a little bit deeper into understanding like what makes sense, what does not make sense. Uh,
Right.
anyway, so now in case of Square, if you would look at the same thing, Square did not do too many things new. What Square did was doing incrementally better things. But then when you have this, everything in culmination, you would have a very interesting output of that, and that's what Square did. So, and in the US, if you see the settlement cycle still itself take two days to settle back. So you do the transaction today, the merchant is going to get back only $98, like for $100 transaction, and of those $98, the customer the merchant is going to get back get those back after 2 days of the transaction happening. Like
Right.
that's the classic flow of transaction. Now in India we have like T+1 kind of transaction cycle, so still 1 day delay. But then many of the places it does not make sense. It's
Right.
essentially that I want to pay today. I don't have the money for today, and I have to buy things tomorrow. So that's basically 2 days lag again.
Hmm.
Um, and so this is where I basically saw that if you're able to get the settlement down to point blank, and if you're able to enable like different kind of transactions on the QR itself, which the
Right.
country is already familiar with, then we might be able to break the whole system.
Right.
And so and then again a very interesting part, right? Like if many of the people, like 90% of the people, are not walking with a credit card, and less than 2% of the people in the SME space have credit cards, then it says a lot about the credit card acceptance or basically issuance in the country, right? Like people
Right.
are banks themselves are not suited to issue credit cards to many of the folks in the country, right?
Right.
So it's better if we're able to create some kind of channel wherein we are able to route all these transaction base or everything into the existing hyper accepted UPI space, right? And
Right.
UPI is a very interesting thing. I mean, it basically allows you to Venmo things, but then more from a government driven perspective. So regardless of your bank account, you would be able to do these transactions across banks. Just
Right.
crazy, right? And so what we did was that the system already has a system in place. Like people are understanding this, they understand all of this, but the settlement itself is still taking a T+1 day when
Right.
everything else is real time, right? And so we basically thought that rather than giving them this T+1 settlement, let's do it instantly, right? And
Right.
let people, and rather than setting the money into the bank account, and the reason why they, like many of the companies didn't offer instant settlement was, see, settling up. So as a user, UPI is free for you, right?
Yeah.
From a bank perspective, UPI is again free for you. The problem is when you want to settle the money back, those rails are charged. So
Right.
somebody has to bear that transaction cost when a corporate is driving their transaction, somebody like us or an enabler, right? And that transaction cost is somewhere between 2 to 5 rupees every
Right.
transaction. So
Right.
then the less number of transactions you settle is the more money you save. And
Right.
that's why the whole system basically did that. So we started to think about like how Square was able to do the second thing, and which is very interesting. So if somebody swipes on a on a Square terminal, the money basically gets settled with a virtual account in Square's own, the whole escrow account or the nodal account setup, and it's basically
Right.
the same system everywhere in the world. It's the same exact same thing. Now, the interesting thing what Square did was they were able to redirect the same funds to a card that they have given to their merchants, and they were like, if you want to, like, you don't have to wait for 2 days. You just have to, if you want to just use this money, you can start using our card, right?
Right.
And then this extra money that is required by somebody else to be paid, so for the transaction cost, can be repurposed by the usage of this card, wherein you're earning an MDR of 4%,
Right.
right? And so essentially, if even if you're paying 2% and getting an early settlement done, right, from let's say Visa, then also you are still able to make 2% additional as
Right.
profits. And this is what Square did, like just this, incrementally better thing. It's not a new thing. It's always existed, but then they repurposed the exact same things in the system and retargeted everything to a very different kind of flow. So if
Right.
you are able to do and so here's what we understood as, and obviously, I mean, I'm telling you this because this is all in retrospective. Like we did the exact same thing, but
Right.
then we never realized that this is like what Square did first. So I mean,
Okay.
and that's how the yeah. So I mean, we never focused on strike like Square first, but then we were like, yeah, let's just do it, and then sooner or later it essentially became what Square did. But
Right.
yeah, very interesting thing. So we allowed people to use the money what they are receiving in the virtual account, and then allow them to make the transaction from then and there, so that there's no lag in settlement. And if I don't
Mhm.
have to settle the money back, then I'm not burning anything,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And so anybody, and then the interesting thing is it basically resulted, and this is like again the bonus pointers, right? So um, this wouldn't have worked because we launched too late, but in for process of doing things, we came across a new concept wherein if you're paying from virtual accounts, then the limits of UPI, which is 1 lakh rupees, does not apply,
I see.
right? And so the interesting thing is now every kind of bank, any kind of bank account that you use right now, and this was like our thesis as well, like this is where we started, this is like entire neo banking thesis that we have. We we believe that I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with neo banks in India, but then
Okay.
Indian neobanks and US neobanks have a huge difference. US neobanks get approved by FDIC, and then also have some kind of uh, uh, you know um ownership in terms of the overall consumer ownership, customer ownerships, and cards and everything, right? Like
Yeah.
they kind of operate on their own license and eventually get their own done, right? Like that's what happened in case of Mercury, for example, right? Now the interesting thing in India, there's no concept of digital current, like digital banking license. There's no concept, and
Right.
so what everybody else is doing is partnering up with the banks, making their uncool current version of things cooler,
Right.
right? And and then the question that we asked here was, if that is supposed to be done, then what's the point of um, what's the point of opening a new account if I can make your existing account cooler, right?
Right.
So if there's a national bank, which is the best one, like SBI, and if they are able to, which is like known by every single person in the country, right, is the
Yeah.
most securitized, everybody trusts them, but then yeah, then they might not be cool. So if I just want to make your existing bank cool, I can do that without opening a new account. Like, let me bank you do your banking with whomsoever you like, 15 bankers, I don't care, but I'll make all of this standardized for you and make all of them cool, right?
Right.
And here's what, like, you were never getting rewards, let me give you rewards as well. So what your
Right.
bank was never giving you. And so this is where we have this entire new banking thesis, which is kind of working. Like, we saw this happening in the system, and we are like, yeah, even if we can not only coexist with neobanks, because yeah, we can automate them as well, we can actually outperform with many of these, you know, many of the other players. Very interesting, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean. from a Square to doing similar things to getting into this kind of segment, and now we are in. So here's the way like I put across Mewt to many of the new people, right? Um, I particularly don't say that we are into a just a super app like we started with that we
Right.
did SME banking, but our mission is to make business banking a no-brainer for Bharat, right?
Right.
And the Bharat is not the top 5% transaction that you see. The Bharat happens in the real Bharat, right? Like tier
Right.
three, tier four cities, tier five cities, right? People are
Hmm.
actually underbanked there, and it's not because they don't understand SBI. It's because they don't have a branch near them, right?
Right.
And if, so that this is where I want to that, like not don't want to say that this underbanking is a major concern, but the major concern is essentially the to make things actually modern, like really change the way money has
Right.
ever moved in the business side. Like, it has never changed, by the way. Like since 2002, there has been no change whatsoever in money movement. No change.
Right.
Can you imagine that? Does not make sense. Doesn't make sense,
Right.
right? Like in 2009 or 11 ish is when the new payment systems came out, but then nothing changed. UPI
Right.
was never built for businesses, so it does not function there. So there's nothing new that has ever changed, like since eons.
Right.
And yeah, this is where we were like, yeah, let us do this. So now, if I want to put this in its perspective, we are into a financial highway creation business, right? I'm
Hmm.
I'm basically enabling very different kind of things, um, SMEs, NBFCs, which is like non-banking financial corporations, banks, and large corporates. We're enabling all of them and building roads between them. Right? We're enabling them to
Right.
do transactions at scales. We're enabling them to, use this different kind of networks that are already there and connecting them to each other so that the time to delivery for these financial systems can become extremely
Right.
fast. So whatever we did in SME space in terms of doing things faster is what we're delivering in the entire ecosystem now.
Right.
Yeah, and that has been a very interesting find overall. Like, yeah.
No, no, that's super interesting, and I think the of course there's a lot of parallels like you mentioned there with Square, but when it comes to the Indian market, you have to make something very unique because there's very big differences. Like you mentioned, there a lot like the cities. A lot of people focus on the cities, but that's not where most of the population is. Most of the population is scattered all around the country, uh, and their lifestyle and their way of living, although it is changing a lot with the advent of smartphone and the adoption of smartphones in India and stuff, but even then their way of living is drastically different. And I guess that sort of actually goes to like, I guess the next question I was going to ask is that, a small business in particular is very different in the West versus here. A small business in the West will still have a storefront most of the time, and it'll be a lot more formalized. While in India, it'd be like, somebody selling chai on the side of the street. Like it's like it can go very, very granular. So when it comes to that, I know you're applying a lot of the principles from Square and Western companies, but transforming to India. So like how do you go about gaining adoption on this new platform and really reaching out to these like to that granular level?
So in his like two three things that I would like to call out here. So my understanding of Western, if you would see like the way I think about these things, is primarily on the first principles. Like how would they have thought about these kind of problems, right?
Hmm.
And rather than just saying that this is working there, so let me just draw some kind of similarity and then extend the same things. What I'm doing is essentially understanding the tool set what they would have used, right, and explore them in my mind space. So
Hmm.
for example, if they would have said that, yeah, let's just like hack and saw things, let's resurface things, repurpose things from here and there, and now those elements in the industry would always change according to country, right? Like, yeah,
Right.
India is not a great country. It does not make sense to do anything to do with the credit. Does not make
Right.
sense anything to do with even cards for that matter, right? Like people are not interested in paying MDRs as well. So rather than just drawing the like classic similarities, what I focused on is to enable myself with those tools so that I can become the like I can draw more insights, like what Jack Dorsey would have done, to understand the differences and essentially enable them in a way where it starts making sense, right?
Right.
And those are, I mean, I would put this way, right? Like this kind of growth uh, is uh, is more or less, uh, you can say it's instantaneous when it happens, and then you're like, yeah, I would be able to solve this for sure. Like it doesn't matter. Like I would be able to come up with like 100 of these new things, regardless of whether whether the system basically accepts the same solution or not. Because I would be able to create some kind of model there for sure.
Right.
So that's one. That's like the baselining of things, and then on top of that, uh, how my version of reaching out to these masses has many things to do with the um, with the network creation part itself. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, if I'm saying that, let's just focus on like so. Yeah, let me put it this way: working with and directly acquiring these end customers would take an amount of time, right? And if I'm
Right.
able to, rather than acquiring those end customers and then saying that I'll be selling to them, it will always, my revenue will always be in a multiplication of those ends, right? So rather than saying that I'm going to acquire these N, let me just, uh, from a single industry, let me just open up more industries, which is basically, NBFCs, banking, and corporates. Let me just interconnect these. So these
Right.
same end relationships or the nodes are going to be now N to the power N, right? Because you're just interconnecting these nodes. So your same market of $10 billion now becomes a $100 billion market, like
Right.
same market, right? How does it happen? Very classic. Like think about, for example, Coke, right? Now anybody who is working with Coke, they are only selling to a certain level of what Coke is giving them, and then when they are short on money, they're going to go back to either one bank, that could be, let's say, Citibank, and then or they could be going to the other, two other people. So let's say Western Union or somebody like that, like some kind
Right.
of trade unions or financial unions to help them with the money part, right? Now, because these ABC companies had the access to Coke's customer, they were the only players. And for a new player to come in, they would have to reiterate on the whole process. They would have to get one banker or one financial provider. They would have to again crack the deal with Coke, and then this whole
Right.
process will take 1.5 to 2 years. Right? Does not make sense. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
already integrated with as many banks as possible and with as many trade unions and financial unions as possible, then for me to get just one Coke will take half the time, right? And if
Right.
I'm already integrated with Coke, then for me to get them introduced to any other NBFCs or any other banks is much faster. So rather than taking 1.5 years to do the same thing, I would be able to enable the whole thing in less than 7 days. That's the
Right.
real change, right?
Right.
And so now you're saying that rather than solving a problem for a TAM of $5 billion with super app for one people, I'm basically increasing the same market to a $400 billion GDP level problem. And then
Right.
I don't have to become, acquire the critical mass there. I don't have to acquire 10% of that. I just have to acquire 1% of that, right? And that's good enough,
Right.
right? Because that's like the biggest, that's no other company but Stripe in the world is doing that right now,
Right.
right?
and and I think especially in India that there's such a big network effect in India. I think people in the West
Yeah.
can't necessarily comprehend that, but the amount of users that you can acquire is just on a different level.
No, 100%. So it's and there's a problem with the market space in general, and I've had a conversation with one of the best VCs, the classics.
Mhm.
I don't want to name them, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
essentially everybody knows about them. But then you would hear things that, yeah, we misevaluated, we basically focused on the growth too much. Now the growth story won't fly. People should be making more money. They should be focusing on revenues and yeah, all these things. But you started this, like you always thought that you're getting people at discount, like a CAC of 50, customer acquisition cost of $50 was very expensive in the US, but now you're getting the same a similar customer for $5. You thought that it's a
Yeah.
discount, so let's just just get it. But the problem was this was never a $50 customer. This was always a $5 customer, and there's a
Yeah.
difference, right? And so this the western world of now is coming to reality, wherein so I have some of the friends in the valley as well, and what I've heard always is that they have never seen any company going without a revenue or a first year revenue plan to the VCs and telling them that we're coming with you, and you give me money. Never happens.
Yeah.
So so but in India it's almost basically became a piece of cake last year. you know,
Yeah.
where every single every single person, regardless of the idea or not, from a good college or um, a decent enough history, was able to raise money. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, the point that I'm putting out here is the way system has been fueled was never anticipated in the way what was expected out of the Indian ecosystem.
Right.
And that's why you would see companies talking about networks, talking about ecosystems and all those things, and then essentially die down like 3 years later.
Right.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah, acquiring users is easy. What would you do after that? You
Right.
know?
That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And I guess relating to that, so once you acquire users and you achieve product market fit, your MVP is given out to enough users, and you get past your first product. You start thinking about the roadmap and how you keep adding on to that. And so when you think about the roadmap and vision for Mute, what are some of the considerations that you think about when you think about adding new products that contribute to that vision?
Oh yeah, so like I said, right? Like we are into highway, like financial highway creation business, and once you
Hmm.
create highways, the new business basically gets born out of, you know, by default. And so for the next steps, for example, we are now launching our card as well. It took a good
Okay.
amount of time. We are upgrading our QR to enable uh, some of the deeper use cases. I won't be able to share it right now, but yeah, that's going to be a bull run. So going
Hmm.
in the market, we might look back to today, like 3 months, 4 months down the line, and we'll be like, yeah, this was the company. I mean, you might say that. I hope
Yeah.
that it
Hopefully.
happens. Yeah, I hope. Yeah, so working on those, and then essentially getting into scaling things in a very network driven fashion. So rather than
Right.
focusing on just one part of the thing, let's create. So we are just focusing on creating this network of networks, or highways, setting up highways
Right.
in the system, and the highway can go anywhere, and so can Mewt. So
Right, right. Okay, well, perfect. Well, this has been a great conversation. Before I let you go, quick question is that do you have a book that you recommend us reading or a piece of content we should check out?
oh yeah, 100%. So there's a so my mental change, I would say it happened because of, I mean, yeah, I've read the classics and everything, but I've read the classics and everything, but then the best book that I would recommend to anybody who feels that they are hyper chaotic in their head, like me,
Yeah.
then or they can relate more to art, and all those things, then I would say they should work. They should have a read. This book name Skin in the Game by
Okay.
Nissim Nicholas Talib. Uh,
Mhm.
it's a part of the series named Incerto. I'm not a fan of the whole Incerto series. It's not all of it. I mean, yeah, I relate to all of those, but then Skin in the Game is one of that book that has changed me. Uh, you can say inside out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay, perfect.
I highly
Well,
recommend everybody should read that. Yeah.
yeah, I'll make sure to check it out. And yeah, like just to finish things off, what are I know you sort of alluded to it, but what are the next steps for you and Mute?
So the next steps is essentially we are now focusing on hyperscaling things. We set up good amount of groundwork. We are going to hire our next set of what you can say leaders, and that's going
Mhm.
to happen very soon. And before we go for the next round, the plan is to essentially hyperscale and also get these new people to get familiar with the system so that they can focus on keeping the lights on to growing hyper fast and then scaling hyper fast. So they do all of that while I can focus on setting the mission properly, because I don't want to get into the space wherein I feel like I'm losing control.
Right.
Like at least for a little while, like not permanently. Like it's fine to let other people grow, but then at least for now, yeah, we're not that big of a company at the moment.
Right. Makes sense. Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Rishabh, for coming on the podcast. And yeah, it was lovely hosting you.
Oh yeah, thank you, Daivik.